So yeah, stop me if you have questions and stuff. I'm gonna start from general ideas of web storage, implementing cookies and local storage. Anyone have a general idea what a cookies are? Like, do you guys know what it means when I say cookies in the context of the, in the web development, web application, in the context of web application, do you know what web cookies mean? Do you know what it means? I'm not gonna ask you technical details, but do you roughly think you know what it means or what it's referring to when you hear the word cookies? Anyone have a general understanding of cookies? Like, can quickly summarize that using plain English? What is cookies?
Is it like a temporary file that website created for the user?
Yeah, so put simply, it's basically temporary files that it created to recognize each browser so that it can, when the same browser come back to request for the content. So remember, everything on the web, everything on the internet, it works through this cycle called the request response. Sometimes I feel like I've talked about this before because I keep it's in this profession you keep teaching the same things and you keep mentioning the same things, and sometimes you forgot whether you've talked about this before. But we talk about the request and response. So everything that happened on a website, right, it waits for a request. A request is when you, let's say if you open up your Android phone right now and you take the Chrome browser and then you go to facebook.com. So what actually happened was you just made a request, right? You make a GET request to be specific. And then what happened is Facebook server have to decide what to respond to you, and they would have to respond to your GET request. And they always respond to you in a way we quite a standard. And so sometimes you see the HTTP 0200, that's usually okay response. You see 404 not found. But regardless of what happened, the response always have to come in, and there needs to be some sort of standard, and I'll talk about that in more details later, but there needs to be some sort of response. So one thing that helps the server decide what kind of response would be most appropriate is that when you send a request over, the client browser, which is your phone browser or something, would also look at what other information would be useful to help you get a response, right? Now, here we bring the point to cookies. Now, cookies is something that anyone who can create a web application will know how to create a cookie, can create a cookie. So you can create a cookie. If you know how to create a Flask app, then you already know how to create a cookie, because it's basically just simple JavaScript code, and it's basically saying that, okay, take the window browser. So I'm talking about the window, the browser, right? Take that and then add a piece of code, and this will be added onto your browser. So I'm just going to show you a real life example of that. So it's less abstract, and then we can dive into the code later to see how do we implement that. Actually, I want to give credit to Aurelia. She is the one who I don't know what is it, but I think I asked her first, like, what were you learning, and she's talking about like web storage and stuff. That's how it brought me to cookies, and I'm like, hey, since I'm sharing this with you, maybe I can do a more complete, like a 40 minutes version of what I just explained to you, and we can all learn from that. And so idea came from her. Alright, so let's take a look. I'm gonna give you one example. This is an example that you guys are very familiar with, because it's a project that the whole code is actually on my GitHub. So if you want to like look at how to implement something like that, I can go to my GitHub. But this is a very simple version of a web app, right? This is a Django app. By the way, if you're wondering if it's Django or Flask, it's a Django app. If I click into one of the courses, I can see all the different courses, quizzes, questions in there, and I can look at the quizzes, and I can take quizzes, and I can look at the recipients who have completed this. And if you click into any of them, it brings you to the guy's profile, and you can see what other awards have that guy received, and you can see this person have accumulated a lot of awards. So that's kind of it. Now, there is not a lot of cookies in here. I didn't implement a lot of cookies in here, but what I did implement was a simple cookies up here. So if you take a look at the color scheme right now, if I click on the orange color, okay, if I click on the orange color and I go to a new web page, so I'm clicking into any of the page, let's say this page, it's still going to be orange. And if I take this and I close this completely and I reopen that page, and you will still expect a orange color. I call it a peach color. So you expect a peach color, and if I click on purple, and let me again copy that, close that out. I think you guys know where I'm going with this, but if I come in there and launch the page again, then I expect to see purple again. So Now there are a few ways to implement a feature like that, and again there are a lot of ways to implement a feature like that. Let me give you another real life example. If you go to github.com, and actually not just GitHub, a lot of websites implement that already, like github.com, facebook.com. If you go into that area and you click on the settings of GitHub, you can change your appearance, you can choose a theme, whether you like one of the 6 themes. So there are a few ways you can implement it, and I want you to think about this when you're building your own products in the future, right? Or right now already. If you're building a product, how do you make your product a little bit more accessible to people who are maybe sensitive to a certain kind of color? For example, this is colorblind, or maybe just have some sort of preference. So for me, every time I build a project like that, I think about the architectural decisions I've got to make. So one example of this here is I can say, well, I can implement it. Let's brainstorm it a bit. How would you implement something like that? If I want everyone to be able to select a color preference, and every time you come in there, it needs to remember your preference. If you like a dark mode, I need to always give you the dark mode. If you like the light mode, I have to always give you. How would you implement a feature like that? Can you brainstorm it like under like 20 seconds and tell me how would you do that? Like anyone, I'm not gonna judge you on like, oh, that's a bad answer or anything, but how would you do that? Anyone have any like quick ideas on how would you implement such a function, such a like personalization functionality? How would you implement it? What is a reasonable way of doing it? Doesn't have to be a strictly correct answer, doesn't have to be a smart answer. Just, generally, like what are some good examples of what are some good, good I guess directions to go to implement something like that? Anyone? Anyone?
Several choice of preference on the database.
Okay, that's good. That's a reasonable answer. So what you would do is that you would say, well, what I need to do is to just save that as a database, and every time you render, now how would you render that though? You will need to query that from a database, right? So you would go into your custom user, and I would have my custom user here, and I would have my preference, right? I'll have my preference, and you can say color, and then you can have a choice here. Your choice could be any of those, but you can have something like this, and you can even have your choices. Oops, I accidentally caps that. And you can, but you can have color, but color doesn't exist yet, so let's create that. And here you have to define your color, so you can say maybe you can select this one and you can select this one. So here in this case, the user would select one of these 2 colors. Sometimes what makes sense is you would probably don't want to store this value. You would just store like red and pink because it's shorter, like this. And then here, if you use Google, if you use Django, you can also translate this by putting this in like that, and then you just have to import the translate. This one. So if you import Django utils translation and you import the underscore, when you see code like that, what it means is that this will render to the user by translating it to the local language. So Django would do all of this for you completely for free. So basically for me, if my browser is looking in English, I'll see red, but for you, if your browser is in Bahasa Indonesia, it would see merah. And you're like, how did Django know how to do merah? Well, you just look at the browser. It says that, oh, you're requesting that in Bahasa Indonesia, so it takes that and it wrap it under translation, and it will give it to you in the language that you want to. So sometimes you see people code it like that. I don't know if you guys realize such a cool feature that is. Just for free. You don't need to import any kind of NLP, NLTK kind of translation modules. You can do that directly in Django, right? So this will translate that for you if you wrap it like that, because you load that in here, Django utils translation. Anyway, this is the color, and you pass the color back into choices. So whatever the user chooses, it will be one of them, and then you will change things in the views.py, right? So you change things. Who was the one that gave me the suggestion? I think Gerald gave me the suggestion. So Gerald, what would you do? What would you do next? So let's say we've done this already, and I'm gonna do a migration. What would you do next to sort of store this? Like what file would you change next? What is a reasonable guess here? Or maybe not Gerald, anyone, if you wanna help a friend out. What is a reasonable guess? Because doing this alone is not enough, right? How do you create the personalization that you need? What is a reasonable guess? What is the next file that you look at?
The form.py.
yeah, form.py could be one of them. Views.py could also be one of them. It could also be a context. It could be so many ways to do it. So anyway, that's one way to doing it. And I guess if you want some sort of challenge, you can go ahead and implement it that way. But one very good use case of a cookies is actually in this area. So for example, this, now let me show you the code to do that. And to show you the code, all I need to do is to view page source. And then all I need to do is to type the word pitchify. I think pitch. Okay, not in there, so I need to find the here, BG color. So this is my script. So I'm going to give you the link right now, and you can go ahead and click onto it. Again, if you want the full source code to all these projects that I've built and stuff, most of my projects are on GitHub. If you're trying to make something and you feel like you can copy some of the stuff, just feel free to do it.
So,
Yeah.
are you using even listener here? Like you use like state binding and then like change the DOM?
Oh no, I didn't even use any state listener. I didn't use any React or anything like that. But what I will show you is the main thing I'm doing here. It's basically just pure JavaScript, and I'm saying that if somebody click on this, then attach the class. So this is, I'll explain this line by line, but I'm not using any React or anything. This is all pure JavaScript, but I'll explain this line by line.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Get it. Thank you.
Okay, so once you click into this, now let me explain that line by line, alright? So obviously I have to create a helper function. The helper function is called cookie value. No, not get cookie. So get cookie is just a helper function. It basically uses some regex. I mean, I've taught you guys regex in some other classes, so I don't want to go into that, but you can go and revisit the video, or you can ask me more questions later on. But it's a simple, this is a simple helper function, so it's not really important. This is the main meat. Particularly, this is the main magic happens in here. So what happened here is, first of all, I said try to get cookie BG color. Now get cookie is gonna use this code that I wrote and find it in your browser. So let me find the browser. Let me show you where it is. Right? If I right click right now and I say inspect, and if I go into this application, and within application, I think if you want to follow along, and I'm doing it too fast, just slow me down, okay? I assume that some of this should be quite easy stuff for you, but if this is very new and you're trying to learn stuff and you're struggling because I'm doing too fast, just stop me down. Just slow me down and say, Sam, stop a little bit. I can't find the the tab or whatever that is, right? Let me do it again. Right click, you say inspect element. Well, you use a different browser, you may get a different, maybe it says inspect element or something, right? Click on that. Or you can use the shortcut to open up your developers tab. Again, this will depend on what browser you use. I'm using Brave. And then move over to application and look at the storage. There is local storage, session storage. We're going to talk about some of this, but I want you to point yourself to cookies directly. And within cookies itself, I want you to take a look at the first cookie in here called BG color. I'm not doing it too fast, right? You guys are, this is okay. If you find BG color, then you will find a value associated with that cookie. So this is what my code is doing in here. It says get a cookie by this name. So find a cookie that has this name, BG color. Now, so can he find it? Oh, yes, it does. It found it. It found BG color. So what does it do? It says if you find it, this is what the code is doing. If you find it, that's what it's saying, right? If color cookie. So if you find it, if this is true, what happened? Well, then you take the body, and then you attach a class, and you attach the class. What class? Whatever you get from here. So whatever you get from here turns out will be Plumify. So it would then, this code is basically saying add an attribute, add a class attribute to be specific, and then add whatever name that is. So in this case here, it would be Plumify, because that's a plum color. But if I change this by clicking on the page, notice what happened. And then if I open up my cookies again, I have to refresh. Now it becomes Pitchify. So now it would add a class, and the class would be Pitchify. And then what does it say? It says that if the class is Pitchify, set a timeout. So every cookie would have a expiry date, just like real life cookie. You don't want to eat a cookie you don't want to buy cookies, even in the US. You don't want to buy cookies that have no expiry. Even in good countries like the US, you don't want to do that. Okay, so you always want to buy a cookie, and you always want to buy a pack of cookies that actually print out the expiry date. You want to know exactly when it's going to expire. So in this case here, it gives you a date that will be 6th of November 2021. So by this point of time, this cookie would expire and it will no longer be in your browser. Does this idea make sense so far? At least conceptually. I haven't really shown you how to do that in Django, but at least does this idea conceptually make sense? If not, if you have questions, can you stop me and ask me questions? Adi, does this make sense? We haven't really looked at code yet, but does that make sense? Does the whole cookie idea make sense?
So what is a good term?
So cookies is used to do a lot of kind of tracking. For example, I can create another cookie. I can call this algorithm ID, and I can give it a value, and I can give it a value of 0001. What is the purpose of this algorithm cookie ID 0001? It's used to track what is my student, the student with the ID 0001 is doing right now, right? So in Google Analytics later, I can take a look and can say, okay, find me the guy whose ID is 0001 and tell me how many pages did he visit, and tell me this and tell me that, and tell me what does he land on, tell me what does he do after that. I can track that based on that cookie. So a lot of times you go to websites like ESPN.com, CNBC.com, you go to all these popular websites, Mashable.com, TechCrunch.com, Datic.com. You see them putting a cookie on you, and if you want to see all the cookies that they're putting on you, you can always use the same technique that I showed you to look at all the cookies. Does this make sense so far? Apart from Adi, anyone have questions? Or Rita, do you understand? Is there questions?
Yes, understand.
Right. So how do you set the timeout and stuff like that? These are all basic JavaScript code. So all I'm doing is I say create a new date class. If you don't believe this is all basic JavaScript, all you need to do is to just open up a browser, because this is a JavaScript console. So all you need to do is you just copy the code and you just type that out. Bam. See, I type new date. This is what I get. Western Indonesia time. Where eBay. This is the date. This is the time. This is the GMT plus 07. So everything that you see in here, everything that you find in here, right? All of this stuff. If you put get time in here, you will get exactly the time. This would be the variable of time. So all of these here are all plain old, very simple JavaScript that basically says, find a way to set a cookie and then give it an expiry, and what would the expiry be? And this is me just doing that stuff, and I'm just copying the code here. So if I can do it again, I'll probably not have to duplicate it like that. Keep it dry by taking all of this and create another helper function, and just call that helper function instead of having to copy and paste my code like that. But because it was simple enough back then, I didn't really care for that. But if I were to do it again, this would be a helper function out there, just like get cookie. It would just be something like set expiry, and I'll just call that, right? So I don't know if you guys are feeling motivated enough, you want to sort of improve that, feel free to do that and send in a pull request. I can merge that in. But let's go back to the whole idea of cookies. So that's what it's actually doing, and you can set a lot of cookies. You can set as many cookies as you want, and all the cookies can have its own expiry date. And you can set your own expiry date using the simple technique that I showed you earlier, using the date and then get time, and then you set like, okay, from there on. Typically I do something like that to show to myself what I'm doing. So for example, every hour would have 3,600 seconds, 3,600 seconds. So that if I do something like, if I want to show like I want to have a cookie that expires in a week, then I would do 3,600 and now I'll put 24, because 24 hours per day times 7. Then this will tell me that the cookie will expire in a week, right? You can also kind of just skip the whole step and just hard code the value, but it becomes less obvious to people who are not Kelvin. Kelvin is Kelvin is that good at chess, then he would look at this and figure that out. Oh shit, you mean a week. For normal people like us, we would look at this and like, what are you doing? What is 600 and 4,000? Where do you derive that value from, right? So for normal people like us, for the benefit of normal people like us, I tend to just write it out like that, even though I could have done the sum, done the multiplication. But if you feel comfortable enough to look at this and know, oh, I know what you mean, it's basically seconds of the number of seconds in a week, then feel free to do that. Then once you have the cookie set up, then you can test your cookies and stuff, and you can, again, like I said, you can create as many as you want. So that's kind of the main idea of what cookies are. Now that brings me into the second point of the agenda, which is maybe not the second point, maybe implementing local storage, or maybe I can show you how to do that in Django as well later on. But before I do that now, before I go into that, maybe there are any questions so far? Anyone have questions so far up to this point? Because if there are no questions, if you say there are no questions, it means that you can actually implement your own cookies by now. Meaning I expect you to, in the next project that you created, when the situation calls for it, you should have no problem creating your own cookies. Maybe the JavaScript you need a bit of help with, I can help you with that. But if you say there is no problem, then you shouldn't be held back by you know, by this and like, oh Sam, I don't know, what do you mean by create cookies? You shouldn't be held back. So if you have questions, you should ask me now. If there are no questions, then I assume that you have no problem implementing your own. So what would that be? Any problems? Problems? No problems? If you're allowed to store CSRF, oh yeah, turns out, yeah. That's a pretty neat idea, right? Is that you try to create a CSRF so that you don't have to pass this value all the time, where if you use something like Postman, for example, you have to constantly set that. So you open up Postman, you have to set your CSRF token and you pass that in. But in the case of, yeah.
So basically, when you want to set up a new cookie, you just add the document the cookies for it.
Yeah, and you basically look at what I did here, which is the document.cookie, and if you look at my code, right, if I go into my console and I type document, you see I have all my cookies in here. I have algorithm. If I print that out, you see CSRF is this one, BG color is Speechify, algorithm ID is this one. The everything that you do in here, right? Everything that you do in a JavaScript, if you call them as a global variable, then they are going to be mounted into the document, right? So this is the DOM, document model. Yeah.
The DOM, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the DOM. Yeah, this would be something that you covered in a very like rigorous academy. They will cover that and talk about like why we call it a DOM and stuff. But for now, probably won't want to go into that. But yeah, you can just print that out. Yeah.
Yeah, every week for my class, we're
DOM.
learning something just to
DOM
modify the
manipulation.
DOM, yeah.
DOM manipulation. Yeah. All right. So now that we talk about that, let's take a look at how Django implement the other facility. And I think I sort of somehow skipped the first part there. But generally, when we talk about web storage, there are a few ways to store things on the browser and allow your app to work with it and retrieve it and you know, change the figures and use the figures to serve better content, personalization, all of those jazz, right? So we talk about cookies, and I want to talk about quickly about local storage. And then I'll talk about sessions and Django, right? Or maybe I'll go for Django first because it probably flows better, and then I'll talk about local storage. But in the end, I'm actually gonna give you code examples to all of them, and I'm gonna make sure that I upload the video as well, so you can pause to whatever section you want. The next time your work comes around and you need to do local storage, you don't know how to do that, you just skip to the right part in the video and you rewatch that part of the video and you can do that, or you can just ask me. Okay, so let me just go into I want to talk about one thing that a lot of people did not know. So remember, where every time you create a Django app, you do something like python manage.py, and then you say start project, and then you give it a name and you create a project. Once you create a project, you say start app, and you give it a name. You give it an app. So let's say my app is a simple beta app, and then once you create that, you have a basic scaffolding, and then you start to migrate and do all those works, right? Hopefully by now you guys have repeated the cycle enough times to know what I mean by that. But I want to show you that every time you create a project and create an app, it doesn't just create all these scaffolding apps for you. It doesn't just create all these files for you. It actually does something a lot more. It actually goes into your settings. Let me open up my settings. And if you look at the Django app that it has for you out of the box, you see that it installed the admin, which allow you to do all the administrative stuff using the /admin, and you go into the admin and you do all of those things. That's one of the facility. If you don't want that, you can remove that. If you're actually in your own Django project right now, you can open that up and you see about the same things in here. So if you want to, I can wait for you. Just tell me to stop, and you can open up your Django project, look into your code editor, and find specifically for settings. So how I do that is I type Command P and you type the name of that, so settings.py, and then you press enter and it would open that up. If you want to do that. If you don't want to do that, you just want to look at my screen, that's also okay. So what you realize is that most tutorials will ask you not to touch any of this. If you like that kind of tutorial, then that's fine. If you want to know a little bit more about, like, don't just tell me not to touch settings.py. Tell me what do they do, so I don't mess it up, right? So let me quickly briefly explain some of this stuff you've seen before. Admin basically creates the admin portal for you. If you don't like that feature, you don't need that feature, you don't want that feature, you just have to comment that out. For me, I like that. It's easy for me to manage stuff, so I keep it in there. Authentication, that's very self-explanatory. And then you see sessions, which is what I'm going to talk about right now. And then there's messages. Messages is the notification. So for example, you see like a big flash here saying that you log in or you log out. Actually, let me do that so you can see that. Let me sign out. Let me create an account. Let me say tiatira3@gmail.com. Let me say assessment, and then I have my message. This is my message. This is actually the message framework that allow me to flash this out, right? This not the whole thing, just this part, right? Okay, so that's the messages, and there's the forms and stuff. Now let's talk about sessions. If you leave this in when you first create your project and you do your migration, you do your first migration, you say make migration and you say migrate. What happened is, if you open up your table plus or your database editor, whichever you use, if you take a look, there are the things that it creates for you, but one of those things is a table called Django Session. This is Django Session. Now if I take this again, and I'm gonna sort them now. This is 1022, 1631. Do you see that? So that is actually just created for me. So what just happened here? How did that just get created? Because this is today's date. Oh wait. This is expiry date, not today's date. But this is actually referring to today's date plus 14 days of, because 14 days is the default. If you look at the Django Sessions, 14 days, and you read the documentation, this one, the default is this. My internet started crawling now. Okay. If you did not set your own expiry, you can set your own expiry, but the default is 2 weeks. So in here, my current date is 8th of October. So I take 8th of October and I add 2 weeks to it. That would be 22nd, because it's 14 days. 14 plus 8, that would be 22nd. And then I just started a new account just now and I log into that. So it gave me a session 16/31/20. So that's my timestamp, and that basically correspond to when I just sign in here, right? So if I go into my application right now, and I will see this session ID, and if you compare the session ID, this would be the session ID. You see that? 3EM88, 3EM88. Now, what does it do? What does this thing do? What it does is that not only does it store the expiry date, which will be exactly the same as the one you see in the database, and you see that mine is pretty busy in my database here. On yours, because you're the only one using it and you're not really trying to do a lot of things with it, you probably don't see a lot of rows for it. But for me, I see quite a lot of rows here. But you see that this will be exactly the same as the one you see in here. So this expiry date correspond to this one, and the session key, which is here, will correspond to this one, right? What does this do anyway? Well, what this does is that if I take this URL and I close this out completely, go back to my URL, and then I open a new tab and I paste it back in there, whoops, it doesn't ask me to sign up for a new account again. It doesn't log me out and ask me to log back in again. Why is that? Why is that? Now, the reason for that is because Django looked into the application, found the session ID, found that it has not expired, and like, hey look, we have an active session. So because of that, we don't need to ask this guy to create a new account and all of that stuff. We memorize that session from the time it was doing that. So these are an active set of session. So the same thing happened if let's say this is a public URL and I give it to you and I ask Kelvin to go into the same URL and actually log in and create his own user with his own email, with his own password, with his own profile picture. And if Kelvin drops off later because there's no internet connection, because he's in Washington DC and doesn't have very stable connection, and then he logs back in tonight, as long as it's on the same browser and the browser doesn't do anything actively trying to purge away the cookies, then guess what? He's gonna still be logged in, right? And this is how a lot of systems work, and we take them for granted. Think about Facebook, for example. Millions and millions of people on Facebook, and every time I go to Facebook, I'm not asked to log in. If I'm go to Facebook, and I'm sure that if you go to Facebook, you're also not asked to log in. And the reason for that is the same mechanism that was all over again. Same mechanism. So you're going to application, look at that, it gives you all of the sessions. It creates all the cookies and it tracks you. It says this is your current user, this is your Facebook user, and it gives you that. So in the actual production level database, you expect to see all of this because this is not just Sam. This is also Gerald, this is Aurelia, this is Kelvin, this is Owen, this is Adi. This is a lot of people. So it needs to sort of remember that, and it needs to remember until when should I log that person out. So at some point, Facebook is going to ask you to log in again because of the expiry. That is what explains this table. Like, do you understand the Django Sessions table now? Because all of you, when you start a new Django project, as long as you don't touch the settings file, then the default is that you include that for you. And this is one of those facilities, and I'm trying to peel away the magic. So Django doesn't feel like it's magic, it feels like it's doing something very, very reasonable, and I'm showing you what it's actually doing. So up to this point, did I explain the Django session table clearly enough so that the next time you see it, and you will see it because you're using Django a lot now, you feel less uncertain about what are all these crazy stuff that it's doing? Or is there still any question generally? Any question at all at this point, up to this point? No questions?
This is all automatic, right?
If you use a web framework like Django, the tables is created for you pretty much out of the box. The moment you say you do your first migration, you say Python manage.py make migrations, and then you say migrate. Yes, it is it will create that for you. And then every time somebody goes in there, it would automatically create a record here. Yes, that's also automatic. So let me actually just do one more round just to make sure that we are all very comfortable. Let me sign out now. I want you to kind of remember my timestamp right now. This is about 16:37. So let me do that really quickly. Create account. And I'm gonna put in again Datira. So I'm gonna put 4 gmail.com. Sign up. Okay, refresh the table. Okay, this one here. See, 1638, 1638. And it now remember this new session. And this is Datira 4. So again, take the current date plus that. So all of this happens, sort of Django takes care of it for you. So if that makes it automatic, yeah, then yes, it does this automatically.
Yes, I want to ask something.
Sure.
The session, like this active session, is only when we do the login. If we do logout, then the expire date will be changed to now, or what?
Oh, that's a good question. So you're saying that if I go in here and I sign out from here, would this record go away, right? This record with the 9D TX. I refresh the page and you see that it's gone.
Oh, okay.
Initially, it was too fast because it was 9D TX. The first 4 digits was 9D TX. But I don't know if you caught that. But when I refresh, but when I refresh, it's gone.
Okay.
And so because of that, you see that today's for today's record, today is 8th of October. You should see 22nd, but both of the record got deleted because I just lock out from both of them, and so they don't memorize that anymore. So you see that there is no more 22nd. When I sort this by expiry date from descending order, and you see that there's no more 22nd. Even though just now I created one account, there is one, and I created a second account, there's two. But because I signed out from the first account, deleted the first one. I signed up for the second account, the second one. So now the most in terms of descending order, the first row is now corresponding to 21st, not any of that we just created. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So for up to this point, right, you see how this works in the background, and you see that Django is doing all of this for you. But Django actually has very good documentation about how you want to go about that. So if you want to actually customize any of this stuff, I think I sent some of this link to Aurelia, but I might as well paste it right here. If you want to change the behavior, for example, you don't want it to be 14 days, Django project, this one. If you don't want it to be 14 days, you don't want it to be 2 weeks. Session. You can set it up here using set expiry. So you can go in there and say request.session, set expiry, and you can pass in your own expiry. So for example, you can say 5 minutes, and that would always have to be encoded in seconds. So you want to make sure you tick that, and you say 5 times 60. Or if you are quite familiar with, with what that amount of seconds would be, you can do that. Django also gives you a few examples of when you would use sessions, but in a more practical example, in a more, probably more real life example. So I'm going to walk you through it very quickly. So one example is like if you want to have a comment section where people can comment and paste comment, they can say, "Whoa, I love this, this new article and stuff. Thank you for writing such a thing and stuff." Sometimes you see them implementing a simple mechanism to check whether or not somebody have posted a comment, and if that person has posted a comment, then you don't want this person to be able to post more comments because that would be spamming the comment section, right? So what you do is that you say, if the request session, if you can get this value, this key value pair, if you get that, then you want to tell the user that they have already commented. When you say a get, you say first find this one. If you don't find this one, this is the default value. Okay, so if this exists, then tell the user that, hey, you look, I'm not gonna allow you to comment again because you just commented, and I don't want you to spam the forum. But if that doesn't exist, then you give this guy you let the guy comment. So it gives you a simple example of how you would implement it in the view section, where you can also use the session and then create your own ID, just like how I showed you earlier when I started off and I said the algorithm ID. Then you can pass in your own algorithm ID in here. I think you need to put in the question mark like that. So you can say, well, I want to track the user. I want to see what this user is doing and stuff. You want to pass this in. You can also do that. You say algorithm ID. Okay. So all of this stuff, you can read up the docs. So I'm going to paste the comments and paste the link to this, and you can go and read up about how to implement that. If not, if you need help, you can always come and talk to me. Oh, I also want to talk about one more thing, because there's so many ways to implement some of this feature. I don't want to take too long, but I'll give you one more example before we end. Okay, so at least you feel like you got more value out of it. I'm going to sign in again using the one that I just created. I think it's 4. Was it 4? Let me check.
3.
Oh yeah, there is 3. There is 4. Both are acceptable. So let me just keep one of them. And okay, now I found a bug, which is good. Okay, this is good. Let me add a quick note here. Sorry for that. Need to know about this. New user without theme, going into studio view, put a bug tag, bug. Okay, so save that. I don't need that right now. I'm just gonna log out, and I'm gonna log in with another account that I know at least has a theme already. If not, I have to go through the process of creating a theme and stuff. I don't want to do that, so I'm gonna just go ahead and go to the studio. I'm just gonna create a simple assessment, and I'm gonna just say learning cookies, or let's say web fundamentals assessment. How well do you know the web? Password, expiry date, I don't know, 30th. Actually, probably don't need expiry date. Maybe just put 29. How well do you know the web? Ownership, pass it to this company, create, done. this one. So let's go ahead, create a new assessment. I don't really matter right now, but let's say web fundamental skills. I'm gonna test you on your JavaScript. I'm gonna test you on your HTML and CSS. I'm gonna test you on your database skills. Gonna test you on your networking. I think that's good enough. Let's go ahead. And okay, now I want you to notice here, if I were to go ahead, right, and create a few of the questionnaire in here, so don't worry about the rest here, okay? And by the way, when you see the word as, it doesn't mean as, it means assessment. So I'm just too lazy to type out the whole thing. So every time you see the word as, don't think that I'm a sick guy trying to create asses and stuff. I'm not doing that. It's just short for assessments, right? So don't worry about that. I'm just gonna go ahead and create a few choices here. So let me ask you a question here. Have you got any experience with Twitter Bootstrap? This would be a simple yes or no answer, so I expect to just have two choices, yes, and I expect to have no. If you have a yes, I'm gonna give you 2 skills in this and maybe 1 in JavaScript. If you don't, I'm gonna give you any points. Maybe I'm gonna give you a negative points here. And then I'm gonna ask you a linear skill. How much time last week how much time did you spend on your web skills last week? How much time in hours, maybe? Answer in hours. If it's 7 or more, pick 7. And then I'm gonna just give you a slider. I'm gonna say the slider goes up to 7. For every hour that you spend, I'm gonna give you 1 skill in here, maybe a few skills in here, maybe 1 negative. It doesn't matter right now, just a few skills in here. Okay, so let's say something happened here. Let's say I just lost my internet connection because I've just spent all this time creating all of this work. And this is, you can think of it like using Google Docs, for example, or Google Sheets, for example. And if let's say anything just happened, right, my browser just disconnected from the web while doing all of this, do I have to start all over again? Well, that's going to be disastrous because every time, say, my internet got disconnected, I have to start from all over again, and I already created all of this stuff. So what would be a reasonable thing to do is to cache it, right? So now we go back to we talk about how do we use either local storage or maybe even cookies, but maybe in this case here, local storage is more appropriate because I just want it to last for the session. So let me show you what I mean by that first, and then I'll show you how to implement that, okay? So if I were to take this and I accidentally close it, bam, just completely gone. You would think that, oh, now it's going to be horrible because you just lost all the progress. But it doesn't. You don't actually lose the progress. At least the way I code it, you don't. And the reason you don't is because if you go back to that area, oh crap, you actually did. I need to refresh. Hold on, let me make sure that it's still in there. If not, I haven't really implemented that properly because I'm still coding this up. Okay, let me do that again. Sorry for that. But at least we don't have to create a new dimension set. It's already linked in there. So and you notice what I'm doing. I think some of you may already get the hint of what I'm doing. Is that every time I make any of these changes, instead of passing them to the database because they are not created yet, if every time somebody do something like that, I pass them to the database, it's going to be very busy. I'm going to be passing in a lot of the calls into the database. So instead, let me just write some question. I'm just going to copy this code so I don't have to generate some question. So I'm going to just put this one in here. Put a button group. Put yes, put no. Give it a few things here. And if I sort of refresh the page, you see that it still remains off there. So the trick is that as long as I don't quit this out. But let me just go ahead and do another one. Did you spend on your web skills last month? I'm gonna give you up to 8. For each one of them, I'm gonna give you a score, a bit of score here, a bit of score here, maybe a bit of web networking, a lot of JavaScript, save close. And I'll give one last one. What medium do you use to learn web application engineering development? And what are some good options that you guys use? I know I asked you guys to go to free code camp a lot. What other options are there? Are there any other things that you guys use that are good that I don't know of? YouTube maybe? What other options are there? What other options are there for like learning web skills? Bootcamp. One more. Peer learning, kind of like super type. Okay, now again, if I accidentally refresh the page, or if I accidentally tap away into my dashboard, and I go back to my studio, and I click into this one, continue, it is still all there. All of this is still there. How did that happen? Right? So I implement a very simple caching mechanism. that allows you to sort of store this locally on the guy's browser, so that if anything happens, it actually doesn't always work that way because of I'm probably using a lot of tabs and stuff, so it slows down and you see that white thing, but it doesn't. It's actually very smooth supposedly. But anyway, so if I go into generate recipe, it generates all of that. I'm gonna turn out the feedback. So you can see like I can select these options. I can go back to the editor and I can say, well, I don't want it to be a checkbox. I want it to be a multi-select drop-down. Again, if I generate the recipe, and again, if I turn off the feedback, I don't need the feedback right now. I can select them. I can take away this option. I can select more. I can search for it. I can even search for it like learning, and all of these stuff are in there. But if I go back again, it's all in here. So to implement this, what I decided to do, let me show you what I mean by that, is that if you look at my states, if you look at my browser, what I did do is I actually put everything into the local storage. So for example, let me show you what I mean by that. If I create a new question now, I'm gonna say, again, it's gonna be a binary choice. I say, do you have a mentor? Well, it's a binary choice, it's yes or no. But if I go into my builder and I show you that option, I save that in the local browser. And the local browser disappears the moment I click this off. Or whatever happened, I can set that as well. So I will give you an option. I say, yes I do, no, and then I'll have my choices in here. Then if I create more of if I add some tags and stuff, then and I look into the map, I see that they also map directly to this one. So it says, yes I do give you a mapping JS1. So these are all my data structures that I map into, just so that if anything happened and you need to refresh the page or whatever that is, all the hard work is still gonna be there, right? So if we accidentally go back to the home page or refresh the page or drop off or internet went off, and we go back to the studio and we go back to the page, web fundamentals assessment, click into this one, click into continue, then remember that all the things that we just created, they are still gonna be there, just like this. Why? Because all I need to do is to check for that cookies or whatever you want to call it, check for the storage. If I find it, then load those values in so that the user doesn't have to restart from scratch. So this is kind of very neat because it doesn't make any cost to the databases. Because imagine this, imagine that every single word I type here, every single keystroke. So if I say do you, now every single keystroke, I need to memorize this, meaning at H I need to memorize the H already. If I delete that, I need to make a store. So if you're not careful about how you implement it and you said, oh, I'm just gonna put them to a database to temporarily capture that, imagine how much database connections are you gonna make. That's gonna be crazy, because every single word that you type, H, okay, make a database, A, database, B, database, E, database, space, database, because you need to store it exactly, right? So you really don't want that kind of architecture. Very messy, very expensive, probably just the wrong thing to be doing anyway, right? So instead, what you do is you make use of a clever session storage mechanism. So that's how I did it anyway. I don't know if, you know, I mean, maybe this is kind of a personal opinion kind of way. There are probably other ways to implement it. Maybe you can use the cookies and then you can store them somewhere temporarily and stuff like that. But the fastest way I can think of is to store them in the storage, and then I check for the storage. If there exists, then load it in there. Is that a cool example? Like, did you guys learn something new? Where do we write the code for the local storage? You can write it in the React side of things. You can also write it on the Django side of things, using the session itself. But if you're gonna do a lot of things in React, you probably want to do it on the React level, because every interaction is also a interaction. So for example, if somebody click on the clone, let's say I create a simple linear scale, and again I'm gonna say rate your JS skills on a scale of 1 to 10, and I want to actually clone a copy of that, and I click duplicate. If I duplicate that, now I have 2 of these questions. If I look at my inspect element, I will see that that is also reflected in the local state, meaning the one that I just, you know, the key there. So I will now have question 5, rate your JS skills, and I will have rate your JS skills. Okay, so I would say a very reasonable place to be doing that would be React. To do the local storage. Is that a satisfying example? Or is there any questions?
Actually, the one you use is local storage or session storage? Local storage.
Oh, this, okay, yeah, good example, good question. So we can find out, but if you go into application itself, you see that there's a local storage in here, and you can see there's also a session storage in here, and you can see where did I put that. And in this case here, yeah, it will be in session
Therefore,
storage.
when we close the application and reopen it, it's gone. Gone.
Because it's in the session, you store it in as a session. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can actually manipulate the values. For example, if I don't know why anyone would want to do that, unless if you're trying to, if you're in cybersecurity and you're trying to, you know, pen test something, and you're trying to make sure that you can manipulate the values in here, then that's probably the outside of the use case, right? For example, I can change the title in here. I can edit all of this stuff and try to cause confusion to that, and then this will also. So basically, what I mean by that is that you can directly edit this itself, the values in here, the key values in here. I just don't see why any normal person who is not in the cybersecurity doing any kind of work like that, why would anyone would just manipulate the values like that? But yeah, but to sort of answer the question there, yeah, you can, if you want to, you can, but it just probably doesn't make sense. But you know, you can, yeah. Any other questions? But that was a fantastic question.
Oh, wait, sorry. Where is it that you put the code?
American history.
Sorry, what's your question?
Oh, where is it that you put the code for like defining session storage?
Where do I put the code to do this, right? So I put them on a React level. Yeah, I put them on a React level. So let me show you the code.
I just
If I go into the code itself and I type the builder, so this is the builder. I call this a form builder. I created a simple one. I check for if this is the kind of the first hint of what I'm doing. If the builder exists, if that already exists, if assessment ID is already exists, that already exists, then go ahead and use that. If not, then add the assessment ID. Well, the reason I do that is because if I look at this one itself, this is cool, but notice that there will be a problem if I'm not careful about how I implement it, because here this assessment linked to this assessment number 26, which is the assessment that we just created. So the assessment that we just created is basically Web Fundamentals Assessment. What if I decided to go into, let's say, sample assessment for Django, and I click into that one, and if I'm not careful, let me just add a few dimensions here. If I'm not careful, then what's going to happen is I'm going to actually take the store for the wrong one, and then I'm going to pass all that value back into this one. You know what I mean? So now if I look into my application and I look at my stuff, my assessment value is now completely blank. And so as it should be. My builder is completely blank, so as it should be, because the assessment has already changed. I'm no longer editing the new assessment that I created. I created a new assessment, and the old value should not come into this one. If not, the user will be so confused, like what just happened? You know what I mean? So I have to first check and say, hey, is it still the same assessment that the guy is editing? If it is, do something. If not, then empty the whole store or replace the whole thing. Does that make sense? So you don't want to confuse the user. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, so you're gonna like destroy everything.
Yeah, in a way you are. Like, in a way, if you want to write out a comment, it would be like, you know, sort of like emptying the cache, when user no longer work on that document. Because if not, then the same cache is gonna follow this guy to another project. So imagine Adi is creating a Power BI dashboard, putting all these things, fancy stuff, and then imagine tomorrow he created a new project and all the stuff from yesterday's cache is still coming back, and it's gonna scare him a bit, right? So you don't want to do that. So yeah, there is a simple check, and then once I've done that check, then every time somebody do something, any action that somebody take, I always update the cache. That is kind of what I'm doing. So you see that there's a delete outline in here. You see that there's a delete outline. So if I delete outline, if I create a simple one here and I said hello, tell me your name, right? And no. All right. Okay. You see that I have my builder already, and you see that I also have my values in here. But if I decided to click on the delete outline, which is this one, then what should it do? It should remove that. So let me make sure that happens, and it remove it. See that? So yeah, so every interaction, it's not easy to code up something like that, but you know, the best of the application is see things like Google Docs. Any one of you use Google Docs, you don't actually actively save things, do you? But if you, let's say if you get off, let's say you're on a train station, you're writing a blog article, and then the train station went underground, you lost internet connection for a second, you don't actually want to start from scratch, but you also don't want to actively save it to the database every single word that the guy's typing, right? I'm starting a new career, and you're about to write the first sentence, you need to save it, because if you don't save it, it's going to be gone. Then just imagine the amount of database saves that you're going to be making, right? So what is a nice middle ground? So this is one of a nice way to implementing it. So yeah. Any questions? Gerald, any questions?
Listen, can I ask one more question?
Oh yeah, well, go ahead.
I see that some websites sometimes implement like draft.
Mm.
Like, what about that? Is like same thing? But I think it's like for draft, I think they do store it on the database, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. One is to do it intermittently, or one is to do it up to certain conditions. So for example, if the guy did all the way up to like 2 or 3 questions, then you save it. For example, if I log out to this one and I show you, let me close this one up. I want you to see that, like, what about the user experience? So let me click on to work addicts. And okay, I already did this assessment, so I may have to log out and use the one that I just created, which is Tira 4 assessment. And then I'm gonna go into this one and I'm gonna click on that one, and make sure that thing still works. survey report. It says the properties of undefined. Okay. I can fix that really quickly, but that would be like trying to troubleshoot while trying to do a demo. That's really bad practice. But I'm just gonna comment that out for a second. And I'm just gonna comment that out really quickly. User industry. User country. Save it. Refresh it. It's still not reflected, so I have to wait for it. If not, I'm just gonna have. Oh, okay, now it's done. Okay, so some of the web apps, what they do is that instead of actually trying to cache everything, we occasionally try to put them into a commit. So for example, if I click on a value here, nothing happened. But if I click on a second value, it says architect autosave your progress. So it says this. By the time it does this, then I'm actually doing something, and I basically roll up the changes, maybe in batches, and I commit one into one batch, and that way I can store them in in either in a DB or anything like that. But maybe you wouldn't want to, you will want 3 or 4. But if the guy only have 1, then I'm okay with this guy not losing the progress. Meaning if he only enter 1 field, and asking him to redo that 1 question wouldn't have been a problem. But if this guy started doing 3 or 4 or 5, then I will want to cache it and I roll it up. So that's also one strategy to implement it. So you may have to check. One way you can check is to just open up a browser, and then what do you say you were using? Draft. Now you can try and go into Draft and see what was happening, and you can see how many changes, whether they did it that way, or whether they change on they save it on a commit, or whether they use the local storage. You can try and play around with that and see how that's implemented. But that's also one way. Like some of the apps I create, I do roll it up into like a few. So maybe like every 5 changes, I save that to 5 changes. So if you were to lose progress, you don't lose everything, but you will almost always get up to the last 5 changes, and you may lose 1 or 2, and you can roll that up that way. Things like that. Or maybe some of them use a timer, like every 60 seconds, save the work snapshot.
It's time for what have you just said that save for 5 changes or 60 seconds. Does it save to the database or like the session storage or local storage?
More of an architectural decision, I think. It's more probably up to you. Up to this point, in this area, it's still actually on the local storage. So even on the front end, I also use a local storage because it's just very robust. It just give me everything I need. And if I need to restore, I always have to restore from the storage, so nothing touches my database. So I use my database strictly for any kind of like long-term memory, like actual data I need to store. So if somebody actually go and take this assessment, complete the assessment, and then save the assessment, then that is when it goes to the database. But everything else, I just kind of do it on the front. But I can see where there is a rationale to say, well, I want to make sure that maybe you charge the customer $30 per month or $60 per month. And one of the guarantee of why that guy is paying $60, not $30, is that you make sure that the work is always going to be safe no matter what happened. And so so I would see a rationale for why you want it to be persisted in a place. It doesn't have to be a database. It could be a data lake. It could be a storage place like S3, which is typically quite cheap. Yeah, it could. There are ways like that. I mean, depending on who you're selling to. If you're selling like very expensive enterprise level software, you're trying to charge $300 per month just to use your software, then you do expect to make certain kind of guarantees, like, oh, you will never suffer data loss while writing a blog article or writing a a document using my tool. You would always get this and that. I mean, depends on how you want to like implement it and how you justify the cost structure there. For me, I don't plan on selling it like $300, so I don't think I need to make that kind of guarantees. So I feel like I can get away with just using web storage.
Just one more question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
For the Google Docs thing.
Yeah.
Like if we close the docs and open it in another device, the work still be safe. Is what do they use for that?
Yeah, it's actually really simple as well. That is actually exactly like what you learned already, except now you just need to map into the session ID itself, and you want to associate the session ID with the custom user. So here I'm using Google. Let's say I'm logged in with my Google account right now. So what I'm doing is that I look at the session key here. I say this session key actually belongs to this user account. So if this guy goes home and use a mobile phone now, but he logs into the same account, then you can find the latest session and restore from that session. You know what I mean? It's actually not as complicated as you think. It's actually very simple to implement as well, but I feel like that may have to be another session I can show you. But yeah, I get what you're trying to say, but that is actually not as hard because Django make it really easy using the request.session, request.user, all of that stuff. If you never got to use that, I recommend you try to read up the article and the one that I sent, and look specifically at like things like request.user, request.session, and see what do they do. So a lot of people learn Django and they think they're learning Django because they don't have to worry about that, and they don't actually appreciate all the details that the Django provides you. And Django actually provides a lot of these kind of facilities. So you can actually take that and you said, well, if you save your work right now, then I'm gonna associate the session with this user. So if you go back and you use a different computer and stuff, as long as you still log into your user, I'm gonna restore from the last session. Yeah, so that is something that is quite easy to do in Django. Not as easy if you use something else and you implement your own things from scratch using Flask or something. Which is why, at the beginning of time I told you to not spend too much time on Flask, like learn up to 6-7 level. At least that's what I told Calvin. I don't remember if I said that to you guys as well, but I said get to maybe 6-7 out of 10. That's good enough. Move on, go and learn Django and be really good at Django because it provides you so many tools to create awesome software, help you become a better entrepreneur in the future as well, launch all kind of software tools and stuff like that. So yeah, this is one of those things that Django provides you.
Thank you, Sam.
Any questions?